here in the castle grounds, and before we go outside and look at our habitats, what we're going to do first is we're going to have a little look at some of the definitions that we find and use in ecology, describe them, and also look at our adaptations that animals and other living things have that help them survive in their habitats. So a few different definitions that we have in the area of ecology. First one would be in ecology itself. And ecology is the study of interactions between living things and their environment. Now, between the living things and the environment, the space we know as the ecosystem. So the ecosystem then, that is the community of organisms and the environment that they're living in. So when we talk about an ecosystem, we're not just talking about the living things, we're also talking about the not living things, the abiotic factors. So these could be, for instance, temperature, wind speed, or even sunshine. The habitat, most people have already heard the word habitat. The habitat, quite simply, is the place where a plant or animal lives. In the domain here, we have several different types of habitats. We have woodland, grassland, and we have ponds and rivers. Later on, we're going to look at our pond habitat. When we talk about a group of living things, we sometimes refer to them as a population. Now, just to be clear, a population are all the members of the same species in an area. So it's all the same species of living thing, be it plant, animal, or fungi, in its habitat. If we want to talk about groups of living things all living together in a habitat, we call this the community. So the community is all the different populations in an area. So all the different populations of all the different types of species living together. In the picture, for instance, here we have the African savanna, where you have lions, you have zebra, you have wildebeest, and a couple of humans driving through as well. So the niche is the organism's role within a habitat or community, the role it provides and fulfills. So different roles that animals or living things could fulfill. For instance, a bird of prey, here he's our predator. You could also have the prey, or if you are a green plant, then you are the producer, because you're able to produce your own food. So all living things in their habitat, they are adapted to live there. Adaptations allow living things to survive in their chosen habitat. If we look at adaptations, we can split these into three different kinds of adaptations. So structural adaptations in living things is the structure of the animal or the plant and how that allows them to adapt to their environment. For instance, camouflage is a structural adaptation, as we see in zebras. It can cause confusion in predators such as lions and make it hard for them to identify one individual animal amongst the herd, allowing them to escape any predatory risk. Another type of adaptation that we see in living things is behavioural adaptations, and we see these mainly in animals. A behavioural adaptation is a behaviour that an animal has chosen that will help them adapt to an environment. So for instance, in animals that live in very, very cold climates, they might choose to hibernate, such as bears. Smaller mammals might choose to hibernate or sleep during the day and come out at night when there are less predators and it's safer to do so. Competitive adaptations is something we see in plants and animals, and this can be competition for light, for water, for food, or for mates. In plants, we see this, for instance, in flowers in the springtime. They choose to grow at different times of the year, so they don't have to compete for different resources such as light and nutrients. In animals, for instance, you might have two stags fighting over a mate. When looking at adaptations, any adaptation is linked to the habitat, the ecosystem, the biome, and the predator-prey role of the living thing that allows them to adapt and live happily in their environment. Ecosystems cannot function without an energy source. On Earth, our energy source is the sun, and ecosystems cannot function without this constant input of energy. On Earth, sunlight provides our external source of energy. This sunlight is utilised by green plants who photosynthesize and use the sunlight to produce their own energy. All animals, including humans, gather our energy from eating either the green plants or the animals that eat the green plants. The best way to show how energy flows through a specific habitat is by producing a food chain for that habitat. We're going to look at food chains and food webs now. Right, so food chains basically show the relationship between living things in a habitat. So we usually start with a green living thing, like say for instance, in the park here we have grass. So we have our grass growing on the ground. And then what might eat the grass? Well, maybe some rabbits. Fortunately, our poor rabbit might get eaten, possibly like a predator or like a fox. So that's our basic food chain. So we have the grass that grows, that's eaten by our consumer, the rabbit, who's then eaten by our predator, the fox. And that's a basic food chain. So food chains show one set of relationships in a habitat between the different living things, but it's not representative of the whole habitat. To do that, we need to construct a food web, which is several chains together. So our original chain we looked at, we had our grass, which was eaten by our rabbit, who was then unfortunately eaten by a fox. Now that same grass is going to be food sources for other consumers. So for instance, in this grass here, in this chain here, the grass, maybe dead grass, might be eaten or decomposed by a worm, who's then eaten by a robin. Or we can have our grass again, for a different chain, eaten by an aphid, a green fly, who's then eaten by its predator, the ladybird. And as well as having these separate chains, they can interact as well. So our robin, for instance, could get eaten by our fox, or our ladybird could be eaten by our robin, or our worm could eat anything that has died because it's a decomposer. So the web shows all the relationships between all the living things in the habitat. So the habitat we're going to look at today in the castle grounds is the pond, and we are going to do some pond dipping. This is a methodology that ecologists use to assess the water quality and the health of such a habitat. For pond dipping, we need a specific set of equipment. So most importantly, we have a pond net. So this is a very specific net with a long handle, so we can safely reach into the pond and take a sample from the bottom, looking at the animals that live in the mud below. The pond net has a very, very small aperture, so it only really lets out water, so we manage to catch all the smaller insects. Once we have our pond net swept, we would empty it into a pond tray. This is a white tray which will allow us to sort through the catch and see if we can find any insects. It's important that the tray is white because then the insects can be seen clearer. Any insects or invertebrates that are found, then we can move to a bug viewer. This is a jar with a magnified lid. This allows us to observe the animals, so if we need to count legs or wings when identifying them. If the bug viewer isn't strong enough, then we would use a stereo microscope or even a magnifying glass to have a closer look at the animal to help identify it. When moving the invertebrates from the pond tray onto either a bug viewer or a stereo microscope stage, we use pipettes and spoons so we don't damage or hurt the animals, and afterwards we can return them alive back to their habitat. The last but one of the most important things on our list is an identification sheet. This is an identification key that we use to identify the invertebrate from the pond. We can either use a yes or no answer sheet, or you can use a field guide. We're very lucky here in Birr to have two water habitats. We have a river and we have our man-made lake as well. Now obviously in working in open water we have to be really, really careful. So today we will be working behind ropes. Please do not try this on your own, and don't try this in any area that you're unfamiliar with. for joining us today on our video on pond dipping. We hope you enjoyed the video, filmed as part of our Wild Connections project, funded by Science Foundation Ireland. We hope it's inspired you to check out nature in your local area and to come visit us in the castle to see our different habitats. Until next time, thanks very, very much.